One of the first Dominicans to travel to the United States of America, and of whom we have historical reference, was an immigrant named Juan Rodriguez, who arrived in New York in 1613. The data indicates that Rodriguez, a merchant believed to be mulatto, settled in the Hudson River area and is recognized as the first non-native immigrant in that region. But let's fast forward several years to the great wave of Dominican migration during the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Although there is no consensus on when and how they occurred, it's generally estimated that the first significant wave of Dominican migration began in the 1960s and peaking in the mid-90s. Many of the Dominicans who migrated to the United States came from the urban and rural areas of Dominicana. The reasons that caused the departure to other countries were various and have lasted over a century. In the first years, 1900 through 1960, they were small groups formed mainly of wealthy Dominicans. However, the greatest influx of Dominicans traveling to the U.S. was recorded from 1960 to 1980 due to the economic instability, social unrest, and political persecution, which caused many Dominicans to come to the U.S. seeking asylum and political refuge. The U.S. process of granting visas to immigrants was an escape valve for the Dominican people. In addition, changes to the U.S. immigration laws favored family reunification, which allowed many Dominicans to bring their relatives with them. During the 1970s and 80s, the largest population of Dominicans in the United States was in New York State. New York offered jobs in the construction industry, factories, restaurants, the hotel and service industry, attracting Dominicans seeking to improve their economic situation. Although many Dominicans already had family or friends established in New York, which aided in facilitating their transition. New York offered services and resources for immigrants, such as legal, medical, educational assistance, and the presence of a large Dominican community in New York allowed them to keep their culture and traditions alive. The geographic proximity and availability of flights and boats made New York an attainable destination. U.S. immigration policies at the time allowed the entry of workers and families and provided the perfect opportunity for those seeking the American dream, striving for a better life. The Dominican community also grew significantly in neighborhoods like Washington Heights and Manhattan and the Bronx, as well as New Jersey, Massachusetts, Florida, and Rhode Island. However, the greatest challenge was the language barrier. The vast majority did not speak English, making communications difficult. In most cases, they had to rely on interpreters or family members who did speak the language to carry out everyday tasks. This is most evident in the case of children attending school. The language barrier placed major limitations on their education and academic performance. Not being able to speak the English language made it difficult to receive basic services such as health care, legal assistance, and government benefits. In addition, it often limited access to better jobs and work opportunities, so they had to accept low-paying jobs with long hours and little opportunity for advancement. Even those who were professionals were forced to accept jobs that required little or no education. In fact, many worked multiple jobs just to cover their own expenses and maybe send a little money to their families back in the Dominican Republic. The inability to communicate effectively led to frustration and stress from social isolation and a feeling of being disconnected from society. Adjusting to a new culture and lifestyle was a challenging process, especially for those who left their families and communities behind in the Dominican Republic. They often faced racial prejudice and discrimination, which affected their job opportunities and social acceptance. And the lack of legal documents or uncertainty about their immigration status generated anxiety and limited their opportunities. So many had to settle for urban areas with low-quality housing and difficult living conditions. They crowded into small, old apartments in neighborhoods like Washington Heights in New York. An important issue that's rarely mentioned is the issue of adaptation to a completely different climate from that of the Dominican Republic. Winters for Dominicans who immigrated to New York were extremely challenging. The extreme cold and snow were something totally new for the Dominican people, accustomed to the warm and sunny climate they grew up in. Adapting to the colder climate was especially difficult for older adults and children, causing health problems such as arthritis and respiratory disease. The fog and darkness of winter were oppressive, and the cold weather meant additional expenses for warm clothing. Many Dominicans had to adapt to wearing parkas, gloves, and hats for the first time in their lives. The cold winters affected outdoor activities, which affected socialization and increased nostalgia for the warm, sunny climate of the Dominican Republic. Despite adapting to a new and different climate, many found employment at restaurants, hotels, and other hospitality services, while others worked in construction, taking advantage of the demand for labor in this sector. Some took the bold move of opening small businesses, such as beauty salons and warehouses and grocery stores, especially in areas with a high concentration of Dominican population. North of Manhattan are neighborhoods of Washington Heights and Inwood, which serve as the largest concentration of Dominicans outside the Dominican Republic.